I'm taking the dog, you get the kid. Mark's words hit the courtroom like a slap. His mother's laugh echoed from the gallery behind him, sharp and cruel. At least the dog's trained. I felt my face burn as the few spectators turned to stare. Even the court reporter looked up from her machine, eyebrows raised. But it was my 7-year-old son, Tommy, who made my heart shatter. He was sitting in the front row, his small hands gripping the wooden bench, watching his father dismiss him like a broken toy. The judge's gavel hadn't even fallen yet, and already Mark was treating our custody hearing like a joke, like our son was a consolation prize. He didn't want. My name is Sarah Chen, and I used to believe in fairy tales. 3 years ago, I was a different person. I was the wife who packed Mark's lunch every morning, who ironed his shirts while he slept in, who smiled and nodded when his mother criticized my cooking at family dinners. I was the woman who worked part-time at the local library, so I could be home when Tommy got off the school bus, who saved every penny for our someday house while Mark spent his bonuses on golf trips with his buddies. I was the woman who made excuses for why my husband came home at midnight smelling like perfume that wasn't mine. The marriage started cracking 2 years ago, when I found the credit card statements, designer dinners I'd never eaten, hotel rooms I'd never seen, a jewelry purchase for a bracelet that never appeared on my wrist. When I confronted Mark, he didn't deny it. He laughed. "What did you expect, Sarah? You stopped trying years ago." I looked down at my library volunteer badge, my clearance rack cardigan, my sensible shoes. When had I stopped trying? When had I become invisible in my own life? The final break came 6 months ago. I was folding laundry when I found the receipt in his pocket, a romantic weekend getaway to wine country. The dates matched the weekend he'd told me he was visiting his college roommate in Sacramento. The receipt was for 2 people, but I'd been home with Tommy, nursing him through the flu. That night, I didn't wait for Mark to come home. I packed a bag for Tommy and myself, left a note on the kitchen counter, and drove to my sister's apartment across town. The divorce papers were served a week later. Tommy was 5 when I left, 6 when the divorce was finalized, and 7 now as we sat in family court fighting over custody. He was the reason I'd stayed as long as I did, and he was the reason I finally found the strength to leave. My son was born curious about everything. He collected rocks, memorized dinosaur names, and asked questions that made me remember why the world was beautiful. When he was 4, he found a wounded bird in our backyard and insisted we take it to the vet. When the vet said the bird would be fine but needed to stay overnight, Tommy asked if he could leave his favorite stuffed animal there, so the bird won't be lonely. That was my son, the boy who worried about a bird's feelings. The boy his father just called the kid in open court. Tommy had been splitting time between Mark's house and our small apartment for months now. The court-ordered temporary arrangement gave Mark every other weekend and Wednesday evenings, but I could see the toll it was taking. Tommy would come home from his father's house, quiet and withdrawn, clutching his backpack like a lifeline. "Dad doesn't really want me there," he'd whispered one night as I tucked him into bed. "He just talks on the phone and watches TV. His girlfriend Jessica doesn't like it when I'm loud." Jessica, 25 years old, blonde, childless, and everything I wasn't. She'd been living with Mark for 3 months now, sleeping in the bed where I'd once read Tommy bedtime stories. "Daddy has to learn how to be a daddy again," I told Tommy, smoothing his hair. "But that's not your job to fix." He'd looked at me with those serious brown eyes. "It's not your job either, Mommy." Out of the mouths of babes. The months leading up to our final custody hearing were a masterclass in survival. I'd moved Tommy and myself into a 1-bedroom apartment 20 minutes from his school. I slept on a pull-out couch so he could have the bedroom. I picked up extra shifts at the library and started tutoring kids in reading after school to make ends meet. Every morning, I packed Tommy's lunch in a brown paper bag decorated with his favorite superhero stickers. Every afternoon, I helped him with homework at our tiny kitchen table. Every evening we read together on the couch, his head on my shoulder, my fingers in his hair. I couldn't give him the big house with the pool that his father had. I couldn't buy him the newest video games or designer clothes. But I could give him consistency. I could give him my full attention when he walked through the door. I could give him bedtime stories and morning hugs and the kind of love that doesn't come with conditions. The hardest part wasn't the financial struggle or the loneliness. It was watching Tommy try to navigate between two worlds. He'd gotten good at reading the room, at knowing when to be quiet, at not asking for things he wanted. At 7 years old, he was already learning to make himself smaller to keep the peace. "I don't want to make Dad mad," he'd say when I asked if he wanted to call his father. "Your feelings matter too, sweetheart," I'd remind him. "You're allowed to want things." But I could see him filing that information away like it was a foreign concept. I started going to therapy, not because I wanted to, but because I needed to understand how to help Tommy through this. Doc Martinez was a kind woman in her 50s who specialized in children of divorce. She taught me about parallel parenting, about protecting Tommy from adult conflicts, about letting him love both his parents without feeling guilty. "Children need permission to have complicated feelings," she told me. "They need to know that loving one parent doesn't mean betraying the other." I carried that wisdom like a shield. When Tommy came home from Mark's house upset, I listened without bad-mouthing his father. When he missed his dad, I helped him write letters. When he asked why Mommy and Daddy couldn't live together anymore, I gave him age-appropriate answers about how sometimes grown-ups are better parents when they don't live together. What I didn't tell him was how his father had laughed when I'd asked for joint custody, how Mark's lawyer had argued that I was financially unstable and emotionally volatile, how Jessica had been spreading stories around town about my jealous behavior and inability to co-parent effectively. I bit my tongue and focused on what I could control, showing up for Tommy every single day. The family courthouse was a beige building with fluorescent lights that made everyone look sick. I'd been there twice before for preliminary hearings, but today was different. Today, the judge would decide Tommy's future. Mark arrived with his lawyer, a sharp woman in an expensive suit, who looked like she ate opposing counsel for breakfast. Mark wore his best navy suit and his trustworthy father's smile. Jessica sat in the gallery behind him, her blonde hair perfectly styled, her manicured nails gleaming under the harsh lights. They looked like success. They looked like the kind of family that belonged in the big house with the pool. I wore my best dress, a navy blue sheath from Target that I'd bought specifically for court appearances. My sister had done my hair and makeup, trying to make me look stable and professional. But sitting across from Mark's polished presentation, I felt like I was playing dress-up. Tommy sat in the front row between my sister and Mark's mother. At 7, he was too young to testify, but old enough to understand that today would determine which parent he'd live with primarily. The judge would make her decision based on what was in the best interest of the child. But I knew the statistics. Fathers who asked for custody usually got it, especially fathers with higher incomes and stay-at-home girlfriends. Mark's mother had been particularly vocal about the arrangement she preferred. "That boy needs structure," she'd announced at the last family gathering I'd attended. "Sarah's too soft on him. He needs a father's discipline." Never mind that Mark had never changed a diaper, never helped with homework, never attended a parent-teacher conference. Never mind that he'd forgotten Tommy's birthday last year and had to be reminded by his assistant to send a card. The courtroom felt like a trap. The same walls that were supposed to deliver justice felt like they were closing in around me. I could feel the weight of everyone's expectations, everyone's judgments, everyone's opinions about what kind of mother I was. But then I looked at Tommy. He was wearing his favorite button-down shirt, the one with tiny dinosaurs that he'd picked out himself. His hair was combed neatly, but one stubborn cowlick stuck up in the back. He was swinging his legs nervously, his feet not quite touching the floor. This wasn't about me, this was about him. The proceedings started routinely enough. Mark's lawyer painted a picture of a stable, two-parent household with financial security and traditional values. She emphasized Mark's career success, his home ownership, his supportive partner who could provide full-time care for Tommy. "Mr. Chen can offer Tommy opportunities that, frankly, Ms. Chen cannot," she argued. "Private school tuition, extracurricular activities, college savings. He can provide the stability that every child deserves." My lawyer countered with evidence of my consistent involvement in Tommy's daily life. School records showing I'd attended every parent-teacher conference. Medical records proving I'd taken Tommy to every doctor's appointment. Character witnesses who testified to my dedication as a mother. But I could see the judge's expression. She was impressed by Mark's financial stability, his clean record, his promises of providing for Tommy's future. That's when Mark made his fatal mistake. Your Honor, he said, standing up with that confident smile, I think we can all agree that children need structure and discipline. I'm prepared to take full custody. Sarah can keep the dog if she wants. I know how attached women get to their pets. But Tommy needs a father's guidance. The courtroom was quiet. Even his lawyer looked surprised by his casual dismissal of my role in Tommy's life. But it was his mother's reaction that made my blood run cold. At least the dog's trained, she said from the gallery, loud enough for everyone to hear. A few people gasped. Mark's lawyer shot her a warning look, but the damage was done. The judge's expression shifted from neutral to shocked. She'd been a family court judge for 15 years, and I could see she'd never heard a grandmother refer to her own grandchild so dismissively. Miss Chen, the judge said sharply, you are observer in this courtroom. Any further outbursts, and I will have you removed. But Tommy had heard everything. I watched my 7-year-old son's face crumple as he processed what his grandmother had said. He looked from his father to his grandmother, then to me, his eyes filling with tears. And then something unexpected happened. Tommy stood up. Excuse me, he said in his small, clear voice. Judge lady, can I say something? The entire courtroom went silent. The judge looked down at this little boy who'd just called her judge lady with such polite seriousness. I'm sorry, sweetheart, she said gently. Children your age don't usually speak in court proceedings. Tommy's face fell, but he didn't sit down. Instead, he reached into his backpack and pulled out his phone, the basic flip phone I'd gotten him for emergencies. Mom, can I read what Dad texted me last night? My heart stopped. I had no idea what he was referring to. Mark's face had gone pale, and his lawyer was frantically whispering something in his ear. Tommy, honey, I started, but the judge held up her hand. What kind of text message? She asked, her voice careful. Tommy looked at his phone, then back at the judge. Dad sent me a message last night. He said he was going to tell the judge that I should live with him, but that he didn't really want me there. He said it was just to make Mom mad. The courtroom erupted. Mark's lawyer was on her feet, objecting. My lawyer was demanding to see the phone. Mark was shouting that it was a misunderstanding, but the judge was focused entirely on Tommy. Son, she said, her voice soft but firm, can you bring me that phone? Tommy walked to the judge's bench with his phone clutched in his small hand. The bailiff helped him up so he could hand it to her. The entire courtroom watched as Judge Morrison, a stern woman in her 50s who'd seen every custody battle imaginable, read the text message. Her expression shifted from surprise to disgust to something approaching anger. Chen, she said, her voice cutting through the silence like a blade, would you like to explain this text message to your 7-year-old son? Mark was standing now, his face red, his lawyer pulling at his sleeve. Your Honor, I was upset. I didn't mean... The message reads, the judge interrupted, holding up the phone. Tommy, I have to tell the judge tomorrow that you should live with me. But between you and me, I don't really want you here all the time. This is just to get back at your mom for taking half my stuff. Don't tell anyone I said that, okay? The collective gasp from the courtroom was audible. Even the court reporter looked up from her machine in shock. There's more, the judge continued. Jessica doesn't like kids around too much anyway. Maybe you can stay with your mom most of the time and just visit me sometimes. That would be better for everyone. I felt like I'd been punched in the stomach. My sweet boy had been carrying this burden since last night, knowing that his father was lying to everyone in the courtroom, knowing that his father didn't actually want him. Tommy was crying now, quiet tears streaming down his face. I didn't want to tell, he whispered. But Grandma said I wasn't trained like the dog. And I thought maybe if the judge knew what Dad really said. Mark's mother had gone completely silent. Jessica was staring at Mark like she'd never seen him before. The court reporter was typing furiously. Your Honor, Mark's lawyer said, her voice strained. My client was clearly emotional, and your client, the judge interrupted, sent a text message to a 7-year-old child asking him to keep a secret about lying to the court. He told this child that he didn't want him around. He asked a 7-year-old to be complicit in deceiving a family court judge. She turned to Tommy, her expression softening completely. Sweetheart, you did the right thing by telling the truth. That was very brave. Tommy nodded, wiping his nose on his sleeve. Is it okay that I don't want to live with Dad if he doesn't want me there? The judge's face was a mask of barely controlled fury. It's more than okay, son. It's exactly what I needed to know. She turned back to Mark, and her voice could have cut glass. Mr. Chin, in 15 years on this bench, I have never seen such a blatant display of emotional manipulation of a child. You have demonstrated not only a lack of judgment, but a fundamental disregard for your son's emotional well-being. Mark tried to speak, but she held up her hand. Furthermore, your mother's comment about the child being untrained compared to a dog shows a family dynamic that is, quite frankly, toxic. This child has been subjected to rejection, manipulation, and emotional abuse, disguised as a custody battle. The courtroom was dead silent. Even the fluorescent lights seemed to buzz more quietly. I'm awarding full physical custody to Miss Chen, effective immediately. Mr. Chin, you will have supervised visitation every other Saturday for 2 hours, pending a psychological evaluation and completion of a parenting class. If you send any more inappropriate messages to this child, I will hold you in contempt of court. She banged her gavel once, sharp and final. Furthermore, I'm ordering that Mrs. Chen Sr. be prohibited from attending any future custody hearings or visitation exchanges. Her behavior today was completely inappropriate and harmful to the child. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Mark's lawyer gathered her papers without looking at him. Jessica stood up and walked out of the courtroom without a word. Mark's mother was escorted out by the bailiff, her face red with humiliation and rage. Mark himself sat in stunned silence as the judge's words sank in. His carefully constructed image of the successful father had crumbled in the space of a single text message. The man who'd dismissed our son as the kid had been exposed as someone who'd manipulated a 7-year-old into keeping secrets about court proceedings. This is your fault, he hissed at me as we gathered our things. You turned him against me. But I didn't respond. I was too busy kneeling down to Tommy's level, pulling him into my arms as he cried. I'm sorry, Mommy, he whispered against my shoulder. I didn't want to make Dad mad, but I couldn't let him lie to the judge. You did nothing wrong, I whispered back. You told the truth, and I'm so proud of you for being brave. My lawyer was all smiles, shaking my hand and talking about appeal timelines and custody arrangements. But I barely heard her. All I could focus on was my son, who'd been forced to choose between protecting his father's feelings and protecting his own future. As we left the courthouse, I could see people staring. The story would be all over our small town by evening. Mark Chen, the successful businessman, exposed as a manipulative father. His mother, the pillar of the community, publicly humiliated for comparing her grandson to a dog. But I didn't care about any of that. I cared about Tommy, who was walking beside me with his hand in mine, no longer carrying the weight of his father's secrets. The weeks following the court hearing were a whirlwind of change. Tommy seemed lighter somehow, as if a burden had been lifted from his small shoulders. He started sleeping through the night again. He laughed more easily. He asked for things he wanted instead of carefully gauging whether his requests would be met with approval. The supervised visitation with Mark lasted exactly 3 sessions. On the 4th Saturday, Mark simply didn't show up. The court-appointed supervisor called to inform me that he'd canceled all future visits. A week later, I received a letter from his lawyer stating that Mark was waiving his parental rights entirely. He's moving to Seattle, the lawyer explained over the phone. He's asked me to handle the paperwork. He won't be seeking any future contact with the child. I should have felt victorious. Instead, I felt sad for Tommy, who would grow up knowing that his father had chosen to walk away completely, rather than put in the work to be a real parent. But Tommy surprised me with his resilience. It's okay, Mom, he said when I gently explained that his father had moved away. I figured he would. He never really wanted to be my dad anyway. The wisdom in his 7-year-old voice broke my heart and made me proud at the same time. The story of our custody hearing had indeed spread through our small town, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of judgment, I found support. Other single mothers reached out, sharing their own stories of difficult divorces and custody battles. My boss at the library offered me a full-time position with benefits. Tommy's teacher made sure he had extra support at school as he adjusted to the changes, Martinez continued to work with both of us, helping Tommy process his complicated feelings about his father's abandonment and helping me navigate single parenthood without the specter of custody battles hanging over us. Children are remarkably resilient, she told me during one of our sessions. Tommy is going to be okay. He has one parent who loves him completely, and sometimes that's enough. 6 months after the court hearing, I found a 2-bedroom apartment in a better neighborhood. For the first time in years, I had my own bedroom. Tommy helped me paint the walls and pick out furniture. We made it a home together, just the two of us. A year later, I was tucking Tommy into bed in his new room when he asked me a question that caught me completely off guard. "Mom, do you think Dad ever really loved me?" I sat down on the edge of his bed, choosing my words carefully. "I think your father loved you as much as he was able to love anyone. But some people don't know how to love in a way that makes other people feel safe and wanted." Tommy was quiet for a moment, processing this. "But you love me in a way that makes me feel safe, right? Every single day," I promised him. "For the rest of my life." He smiled then, that sweet gap-toothed smile that still made my heart skip. "I'm glad it's just us, Mom. We're a good team. The best team," I agreed, kissing his forehead. As I turned off his light and headed to my own room, I reflected on the journey we'd taken. A year ago, I'd been a woman who believed she wasn't enough. Not pretty enough, not interesting enough, not worthy of the love she'd been begging for. I'd been so focused on making my husband want me that I'd forgotten to ask whether I actually wanted him. Now I was a woman who'd stood in a courtroom and watched her son show more courage than most adults ever would. I was a mother who'd learned that sometimes the most loving thing you can do is let someone walk away, rather than fight for a relationship that's hurting your child. The story of our court case had become something of a local legend. People still talked about the little boy who'd stood up to his father and grandmother, who'd chosen truth over keeping secrets. But for me, the real story wasn't about the dramatic courtroom moment or the text message that changed everything. The real story was about a woman who'd learned to love herself enough to model self-worth for her son. It was about a little boy who'd learned that his feelings mattered, that he deserved to be wanted, that love shouldn't come with conditions or secrets. It was about the quiet moments that followed, the homework sessions at our kitchen table, the bedtime stories on the couch, the Saturday morning pancakes that were just for us. It was about building a life that was smaller in some ways, but infinitely richer in the ways that mattered. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't getting what you thought you wanted. Sometimes it's discovering that what you have is exactly what you needed all along, and sometimes it takes a 7-year-old boy with a flip phone to remind a courtroom full of adults what love actually looks like.